You just go live on my alternative YouTube station in case we say something that's to be purged, in which case I can then download the show later on my regular YouTube station. Yeah, that's the world we're living in right now, obviously, unfortunately. All right, welcome to the program. Charles Moscowitz, thank you for joining me, everyone. And Cliff Kincaid is my guest. And Cliff is, let me just get to my notes here, Cliff, which I just X'd out. So you'll have to elucidate me a little bit here. You're the author of many books. You have an article about that caught my attention. If I can get back into my email server here. This is how things go. With regard to the upcoming midterm election and the reference that I think you more than present in a veiled light, that the COVID-19 pandemic is taking a major toll on conservatives and Republicans. Cliff, could you talk a little bit about that?
Thanks, Charles. Politically and literally. Politically, because COVID-19 is still working to the benefit of the Democrats, not only in Virginia, which has an upcoming governor's race, but nationally. But literally, because the evidence shows, the data show that there is such a thing as red COVID. That is, the disease is disproportionately killing people in Republican or red states. In other words, in Trump country.
Right.
And I've been fighting for months now, many months, trying to urge conservatives to pay attention to this issue, to understand it, and to recognize how dangerous the China virus is, not only to their lives, to our families, our friends. I mean, we just surpassed 700,000 dead. We've lost more from COVID-19 this year than last year. But to understand the value of the COVID-19 vaccines, which were developed under President Trump. And then to understand that despite what you may read and hear from a number of, quote, conservative websites, that this issue is not playing well in the public at large. And I've done a number of columns. They're up on my website, usasurvival.org, citing the polls, citing various data that by casting doubt on the vaccines, by opposing some of the vaccine mandates, Republicans are literally digging their own political graves. They're going to lose. The Republican Glenn Youngkin in Virginia is losing, even though he's tried to recoup by coupling his opposition to the vaccine mandates with his enthusiasm for the actual vaccines. But the fact is, and the opinion polls show this, Charles, most people still fear the virus more than the vaccine. And that, ironically, strangely, it's the Trump people, mostly disproportionately, who are resisting the vaccines. And it's bad politically, and it's bad for their health.
Let me talk a little bit then, or ask about the vaccine itself. When the vaccine was first presented, and just for full disclosure, I mean, I personally am fully vaxxed. I should mention, I'm not against the vaccine. We were told that it had 95% immunity, that the Pfizer and Moderna were 95, maybe Johnson & Johnson was 90, and that people, after getting the vaccine, didn't need to wear masks anymore. Everybody was throwing away their mask, going out, not worrying, it's like back to normal. Then we find out that you can still catch the virus even with the vaccine, and you can still spread the virus even with the vaccine. So put back on the mask, but you're not going to die. You're not going to go to the hospital. Now we're starting to find out that that's not even true either. Israel just mentioned, one of the highest vaxxed societies in the world, that 95% of the people in their hospitals right now who are dying or who have died or who are very sick are vaxxed. So it seems to me that the opposition is more than just a Republican talking point. I think that there is a sense that they don't work, and that there's also a building anger over the fact that various therapeutics that actually have proven to be effective if taken early are being suppressed. So I think that it's an issue that transcends just politics here.
Well, this kind of nonsense convinces a lot of people not to get the vaccine.
Right.
And that's why people are dying. There's been, interestingly enough, a couple of conservative talk show hosts who have died from
That's right.
COVID because they were skeptical of the vaccines for various reasons. And you can find all these websites saying, oh, they're not as effective as they should be. They're this, they're that. Phil Valentine down in Tennessee died. Mark Bernier down in Florida, I had been on his show. He was skeptical of the vaccines. He got COVID and died. I see Alan West, the former Republican congressman running for governor of Texas. He doubted the vaccines. He's gotten COVID, ended up in the hospital. We all hope, we pray he's going to survive. The best data does come from Israel. And I suggest people go to my website, usasurvival.org, read the latest, the biggest study ever on the vaccines. It's 2 million people from Israel. And it finds that the vaccines are effective.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing is 100%, but it finds that the vaccines are effective in terms of reducing hospitalizations and deaths. Now, the Israelis have also found that natural immunity is more effective than the vaccine.
Right.
But do you want to take your chances on getting the disease and developing the natural immunity? There's always a chance, especially if you're older, that if you get it, you will get hospitalized and die. I've gotten the vaccine. I will get a booster. I think we're going to have to live with this China virus forever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the Israelis understand this. You know, one thing about Israel is that regardless of who's in charge, previously it was Netanyahu, who certainly understands terrorism, and now it's Bennett. They all agree on the dangers of this SARS-CoV-2, this virus. And, you know, I've got all kinds of data here, much of it developed by the Israelis, and I give them a lot of credit. The Israelis have seen this coming. They understand what China's up to, even though here in the United States, we're still divided over it. We're nitpicking, oh, it's not as effective as this or that, and maybe we shouldn't get it. I'm seeing all kinds of junk, Charles. This is something I just got in my email yesterday from a guy who runs something called Natural News about the, he compares the coronavirus to the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. And he says, this is the mark of the beast kind of nonsense we're getting from some on the right. Mm-hmm. The phrase, he says, planetary crucifixion, was told to me by David Wilcox in an extended interview.
Right.
Wilcox explains that his sources will reveal stunning new details about non-human technology transfer into the human domain.
Sure.
Through this China virus. I mean, have we gone nuts on this? Don't we recognize where this came from? It came from communist China. The Israelis understand this. Mm-hmm. And if there's any country on the face of the earth that understands survival better, it's China. It's Israel in the face of the threats from China, Russia, and so forth. For some reason, there are conservatives here, previously Trump supporters, who think somehow this is a diabolical plot through the vaccines to kill off all of us. And according to this guy on Natural News, out of this chaos, again, more than 700,000 dead here alone, millions worldwide, there's going to be a planetary crucifixion. This is the kind of stuff we're seeing on Mike Lindell's network about the mark of the beast.
Right.
And
right.
Spouting nonsense from people I used to think had half a brain. They don't realize China has unleashed a biological weapon on the world, that we have to protect ourselves. The vaccines are the best method of self-defense we have. Now, saying they're not 100% effective, okay, we know that. That's why we're developing boosters. But that's like saying don't wear seatbelts because you may still die in a traffic accident. The fact is, seatbelts work. They save lives, hundreds of thousands of lives a year. They may not work in all cases. I mean, are people opposed to the vaccines opposed to seatbelts too? I mean, let's think this through and be rational, Charles.
Okay. Well, I mean, Cliff, I think that also there's a lot of people who simply are, reject the idea that the government can force people to have a needle stuck in their arm. And there's just resistance to that. It's a violation of both HIPAA laws and also the Nuremberg Tribunal. That
all of that's nonsense, Charles. All of that is complete nonsense.
Okay.
Here, this is in Maryland. Okay. Did you get vaccines when you were a child?
Yes.
Yeah. Don't we all?
Yeah, but this is particularly an experimental vaccine based on some new technology.
But it works.
Well,
we've got the study. We got this. I just cited a study of 2 million people in Israel.
Okay.
Israel's been in the forefront of this. This is another country. And by the way, they use the Pfizer vaccines. I did too.
Mm-hmm.
The head of Pfizer, I think, was a grandson of Holocaust survivors.
Right.
Burla. Israel, more than any country on the face of the earth, understands, even though these are experimental, they work. The reason they're experimental is China unleashed this virus maybe at the end of 2019, certainly by early 2020. And President Trump, not President Biden, decided we have to move quickly.
Right.
We needed a method of self-defense to save our lives. And if he hadn't moved, if he hadn't ordered the bureaucracy to work with the pharmaceutical companies, such as Pfizer, we wouldn't be able to have this many people alive at this stage. Again, it's too many have died. Let's keep that in mind, 700,000 over that.
Right.
But if we hadn't developed these, quote, experimental vaccines, we could have had 10 million dead. And look at here in Maryland.
Could I just interject
school kids get polio vaccines, measles, mumps, rubella, chicken pox, hepatitis B. Are we going to object to that too? Even though they're not 100% effective and there are side effects with any vaccines?
I think it has a lot to do with the idea, the ethos that these things should be voluntary. We should encourage people to do it, but ultimately it's a personal decision. And I think
they're not voluntary. They're not voluntary in the schools.
Yes, they are. You don't have
no,
to
they
get
aren't.
any of it. I mean, you can
all of
homeschool.
these are vaccine requirements for children. I'm in the state of Maryland.
Okay.
Vaccine requirements for children.
Okay. All right.
They're not voluntary.
Okay. If you want to go to the public schools, then yeah, you have to have it. But I mean, there are still, I think, unknown elements to this vaccine. I don't subscribe to any of those conspiracy theories you mentioned. But I do find it suspicious, and again, you could correct me if I'm wrong here, that certain segments of the population have been given exemptions from the vaccine, and that includes members of Congress and their staff, members of the White House staff, people who work for Pfizer and Moderna and Johnson & Johnson.
I don't think that's true at all. I don't think that's true.
I mean, that's, again, I mean,
this is some of the stuff you get from Mike Lindell's Frank Speech Network.
Possibly.
Yeah, I don't believe any of that.
All right.
Just
Fair
like
enough.
the stuff about the planetary crucifixion.
No,
I
that's
mean,
silly. I mean,
what
I'm not
kind of, yeah,
subscribing
it's
to that.
silly, but this guy's very popular among conservatives. And this is the people watching and reading this stuff and watching this Mark of the Beast nonsense on Frank's Speech, sponsored by Mike Lindell and hosted by Brandon House. This guy's been, I used to call him a friend. He used to
Sure.
have me on his show. Now he says the vaccines are laying the groundwork for the mark of the beast and the Antichrist. Tell that to the government of Israel.
Right. I mean, of course, I think that stuff's really out there, but I still think that there's an element to this that that involves personal choice. Like, why is it then that our, it's also people of the far left are resisting the vaccine, and for different reasons. And you've got minorities, particularly African Americans, resisting the vaccine. And Black Lives Matter is one of the vanguard groups in terms of encouraging that. So you have different groups. I mean, according to a recent poll, the highest group that is resisting the vaccine are PhDs. I mean, so it's not,
I don't believe that either.
Okay.
I believe if you look at the polls, most people accept the vaccines. Most and more Republicans and conservatives are coming to accept them. For the life of me, I can't understand why they think President Trump, who initiated this process through this Operation Warp Speed, is somehow determined to kill off conservatives and Republicans who voted for him. I don't
President
understand
Trump
that.
has come out in support of the vaccine,
That's what I mean.
but
he's
didn't support
reluctant.
mandates.
He's reluctant because he knows so many of his supporters have bought into this nonsense that it's mark of the beast or crucifixion or this, or he ought to do more, in my opinion. And he's done quite a bit to say, remember, he got COVID.
Yeah.
He had some degree of natural immunity, but he took the vaccine anyway. And you took the vaccine.
Right,
I took
I
the
did.
vaccine.
Sure.
Leading religious conservative evangelicals such as Franklin Graham have taken the vaccine.
Sure. Mhm.
My doctor recommended it. Look, if you want to play Russian roulette with your life and take a chance, you've got that option. But let me tell you this.
Yeah.
If you got kids in the public schools, these are vaccine requirements. Are you going to get upset about that too? Vaccines against measles, mumps, rubella, polio, chickenpox. Let me tell you my background, Charles.
Sure. Go ahead.
I once headed a group called the Committee for Medical Freedom. When this was back in the 90s, there was talk of a mandatory HIV/AIDS vaccine. And I held a national news conference with experts on this subject saying the science wasn't there, to beware of this. So I've been a vaccine skeptic. When my third child was born, I rejected at that time the Hep B vaccine because they tried to give it to him literally one day after he was born. I said, no, I don't trust the vaccine.
Right.
And there were some vaccines that were unleashed on the people, such as the flu vaccine, which backfired and killed a lot of people. And some vaccines for kids were released, which caused more damage and killed some children, such as the rotavirus vaccine, supposedly to deal with bowel problems. And they were withdrawn. So I'm not somebody who's a big fan of big pharma. But let me tell you this. When you've got a situation like we're in right now, with even the Israelis, their experts and others have documented this is a biological weapon released by China. It's not your ordinary flu. It's not a common cold. That we better get prepared, not only to save ourselves, save our lives, but then to mount a counterattack. I'm not saying biologically, but mount a counterattack of some kind against what China's doing to us. We have to recognize the source of the problem. And it's not even Anthony Fauci. If you want to figure on somebody in the federal bureaucracy who may have been behind it, it was Francis Collins, who headed the National Institutes of Health, who's
Right.
been collaborating with China for
And
decades. Yeah,
who just
I say
resigned.
sick the FBI on him.
Well, he
Let,
just resigned, but I mean, people don't trust
so,
Fauci anymore either because of his connection to funding the Wuhan lab.
well,
Um,
it's more than just the Wuhan lab. I mean, our federal health bureaucracy, the medical bureaucracy, has been collaborating with China on this. Let's unleash the FBI on those people. And it's not just the NIH. If you look at, for example, this Harvard biochemist who was charged with lying to the FBI,
Yeah, Lieberman.
who's about ready to go on trial. I don't know if it's still up on his website, but he was being backed not only by the NIH, but by various Pentagon agencies. And he was collaborating with the Communist Chinese. We should be focusing our attention on the source of this virus, because if they can do it once, they can do it again.
Right.
And we ought to be developing even more vaccines at record warp speed, as Trump called it, pace, so we can be prepared. We've already lost 700,000 people. And here we are arguing, well, maybe the vaccine's only 85% effective.
Well, if I could push back a little on that, I mean, there's now calls for congressional investigation into how many people actually have died from COVID, because the government's given incentives to hospitals to classify deaths as COVID deaths, even if it had nothing to do with COVID.
Well, that's nonsense too. You know, that's what we don't need are more investigations by Congress of how you count deaths. That's just what a waste of time and money. The fact is that COVID, SARS-CoV-2, is a very unique virus, and it is very mysterious in a way, confusing even, when it kills someone, because what it does, and this is because of its effect on older people, it will take people with comorbidities or other health problems and exacerbate those problems. So a person who may have COVID disease may be dying of 2 or 3 health-related problems. And you know, whether COVID was a big factor or a small factor, the fact is it's a unique, deadly, dangerous virus. I've talked to many people who've gotten it. It can damage your lungs. If you have heart problems, it'll go after your heart. It goes after your brain, because people, these are called the long haulers, come out of being rehabilitated, you might say, even though they still have problems breathing,
Right.
smelling, tasting.
Oh, no, I've heard about this. I know.
Why are we arguing about whether COVID was a big or small factor? It's a killer.
Sure.
It's a killer. And whether it's killed 700,000 people or 200,000 people, that's too many.
Do you think it's appropriate to give the vaccine to children?
I leave that up to the doctors. I'm not a scientist.
Understood.
All I can do is analyze the best available data. And again, go to my website. You can read a link to the latest, biggest study done by Israel of 2 million Israelis on the effectiveness of the vaccines.
Okay. I mean, maybe
and there's not only an Israeli study on the effectiveness of the vaccines, not 100%, but a lot better than just sitting there and getting sick and dying.
Well, Cliff, maybe you might bust another conspiracy theory I've heard, which is that the vaccine is adversely affecting somewhat large, not large, but reasonably large numbers of young women with regard to questions of fertility, and young men with regard to heart disease that were not showing up before.
Go to the studies.
Okay.
Go
And
to
I'm
the
not saying
Israeli
that's true, by
study.
the way.
The Israeli study says, in terms of the heart problems,
Right.
you'll get more heart problems from getting COVID than the vaccine.
Okay.
By a significant amount. And the Israelis also have a new study out on the fact, according to the study, that natural immunity is better than vaccinated immunity.
Then why are
But
people with,
as I said earlier, the problem with that is if you wait to get the disease naturally, you may not live.
well, then why are they telling people who've had the disease already, maybe had a mild case of it, to get the vaccine?
That's because, in their opinion, the boosters add immunities or antibodies.
Okay.
Now I say go to the science, and I'm not saying go to the NIH or Fauci. Forget them. Go to the
Understood.
Israelis. The
Okay.
Israelis have the best available data because they were first. They're not still the highest vaccinated in the world, but they're up there pretty close.
Right.
They have the best data, and the data is available to, don't go to Natural News or Frank's Speech or, all these esoteric platforms.
Understood.
Go to the data. The Israelis have the best data in the world, and they're not going to lie about it because the survival of Israel is on the line.
Of course. No, that is a really convincing piece for me. And the fact that they're doing that, because they're not crazy. I mean, they're going to do what they need to do to
That's right.
survive and always have. All right, Cliff, how do you think this is going to affect the upcoming midterm election? I mean, you say that Republicans need to get behind this. We hear people like Steve Bannon talk about a Republican mega wave, based on the events of November 3rd, which we can't talk about on YouTube. And that we can, he also pointed out yesterday that in Virginia, Youngkin's ahead now. What say you with regard to the upcoming midterm?
The Republicans are making the same mistake they made back in 2018. And I think I have a column up at usasurvival.org about this. Back in 2018, 2 years into Trump's term, the Republicans were saying there was going to be this big red wave.
Right.
They were going to pick up all these seats in the House, take control of the Senate, and there was a blue wave.
Right.
And again, Trump was getting bad advice from Steve Bannon, Karl Rove, and all these characters. This time they're making the same mistake. They're saying, oh, well, Biden's unpopular. And look what they're doing with critical race theory in the schools.
Sure.
And look at the shortages of goods on the shelves. And look at the inflation.
And the
I'll
influx
tell you,
across the border.
Yeah, look at the border
And
crisis.
Afghanistan and a lot of other.
Look at Afghanistan. There's all these things happening. The Republicans are going to wipe out the Democrats next year and then take the White House in 2020. I've heard it all before. And this time is different in a sense because of COVID and because of the fact that this year, as I say, we've lost more people to COVID this year than last. And the conservative, I shouldn't say Republican, because Youngkin, at least in Virginia, is saying, I'm not going to favor the mandates, but you better go out and get vaccinated.
Right.
Most people, I repeat, they're scared more of the virus than the vaccine. And they're scared for their children. And, I hear this Dan Bongino on his show during the day complaining about adults and kids wearing face diapers, he calls them.
Sure.
Well, when I go out, Charles, I don't know about you, but I wear a mask. I may not believe it's that effective, but I wear it out of courtesy and consideration for other people who may have a different opinion than I do.
I understand.
And when they call it a face diaper, they're insulting people who are scared of the virus. A lot of people out there, I'm talking about a lot of Republicans and conservatives in the circles I travel, they are completely turned off by these nut jobs in the conservative movement and on radio and on TV who are constantly griping about the vaccine mandates. Because these Americans, and they're Americans first, want to protect themselves and their lives, their children, and their neighbors and friends and family. And they are going to vote Democrat if the Republicans don't get smart. And if you doubt what I'm saying, look at what happened to Larry Elder in California.
Right.
We were told in advance of that recall election that, Elder was getting closing the margin. and that Gavin Newsom, the liberal Democrat governor, may be recalled. Larry Elder was Fox News's candidate opposing the vaccine mandates. He lost by 30 points in the end. 30 points. And, opposing the vaccines, even opposing the vaccine mandates, is a political loser.
Okay.
It's a loser.
Fair enough. I also put on the mask if I'm going into a store or if I'm going into a, public venue. But I have questions about whether or not children need to wear them in school. That to me, because I don't think that it's very rare that they catch this disease. And if they do, apparently they are able to get through it pretty quickly. Not in all cases. I mean, if you have comorbidities or if you're obese, then that's another story. But
you can have your opinion,
right.
but look, it's like saying, well, maybe if I go out in my car today and not wear a seatbelt, I'm not going to get in an accident and I'm going to live.
Okay.
You can take a chance. Do you want to take a chance on your kid?
No. Cliff, you make an impassioned presentation here, and it's quite convincing, I have to say. It's making me rethink a lot of things that I was thinking about. So I think that's going to have the same effect on my listeners and viewers, and I really appreciate that. Cliff, can you let my listeners and viewers know where they can read your articles and get your books and anything?
Sure. Let me tell you, since I've become such a pro-vaccine advocate, my columns are being censored all over the place.
As a pro-vaccine person?
Yeah.
I mean, I know the anti-vaxxers are censored, but
no, by conservative websites.
Oh, okay.
By conservative websites.
I guess we're getting the censorship out of both sides.
Oh, I'm being censored almost completely on the right. I've always been censored on the left.
Right.
I mean, I've been, me, I've been under attack from the left, the Southern Poverty Law Center, the Council on American Islamic Relations. They've been after me for decades.
Sure.
They went after me when I was working full-time for Accuracy in Media, and I got under their skin. But now it's happening mostly because of my work at America's Survival, the organization I founded, from the right. They don't want to run my columns anymore. So you have to go, if you want to read my stuff, and sign up for our newsletter, you have to go to usasurvival.org and sign up. There's a pop-up there. You can sign up. Everything's for free. I have a free YouTube channel. Some of my YouTube videos have been censored as well. And
really, because I mean, I'm worried about YouTube as somebody who is conservative. I've gotten strikes for things that I've seen.
Oh yeah. They haven't,
normal.
See, I haven't focused a lot on my YouTube channel on the vaccines. I've got some really good videos up on China and terrorism and so
that stuff
forth.
could get you in trouble.
But some of that, when I did a bunch of videos on the election results, those came under scrutiny.
That's verboten. That topic.
Yeah, and one of those was taken down. So I've gotten strikes from the left about those issues, but it's on the right when I talk about the China virus and the need to defend ourselves by taking the vaccines. All of a sudden, oh my gosh, that's verboten.
See, that's
by news sites on the right, such as newswithviews.com, used to run all my stuff regularly. Sure. Now they won't touch.
Well, now you're on Mike Lindell's shit list.
Oh yeah, Brandon House, who's one of his hosts, and it's because I bring up things like this. Mike Lindell's involvement with the New Age movement.
Oh.
Where he wrote a foreword.
We'll have to do a segment on that one.
Oh boy, this is where this guy Natural News is coming from in terms of the planetary crucifixion and the non-humans, and I guess we're going to be talking about UFOs soon. But this is where some of these people on the right are going, and I think they're out to lunch.
Yeah, that's craziness. I'm totally want to debunk that. Anyway, Cliff, listen, thanks again for joining me. Always a pleasure. Let's do it again.
All right. Good to be with you.
Thanks a lot.